In this episode,
can you imagine you're stood around there and going, that just spent 15 grand on a heating system?
I guess a lot of people have a misconception of wanting hot water really hot.
so what temperature are you heating your indoor swimming pool to, Graham?
The temperature that you feel coming from your radiators will change literally with the weather.
Well, the COP of the system I'm putting in is, hey, look at the temperature of my lounge. And the guys are going, yeah, he's a loser.
It's actually not that difficult to get a well-designed system running on a good COP.
I actually wrap my hot water up to 55 degrees overnight. Much too hot for use because you always blend it down, but
It's a green boiler. It doesn't kill polar bears. It lives outside.
Welcome to Homeowners Q&A, where today we'll be discussing one of the most important considerations for homeowners when it comes to heat pumps, the running costs. With energy prices rising and the need for sustainable solutions growing, understanding how to manage and optimize the costs of running a heat pump is key to making informed decisions. To help us break down this topic, we're joined by Lee Brown from IMS Heat Pumps, Max Waddingham from Good Energy, and Graham Hendra, heat pump enthusiast and friend of the show. Welcome, everybody. But before we get started, we'd like to say a huge thank you to today's sponsor, Good Energy. Starting out as a renewable energy supplier 25 years ago, Good Energy has grown to offer heat pump, solar and battery installations, smart energy tariffs, and electric vehicle charging solutions. Here are just a few reasons to choose Good Energy for your next green upgrade. Good Energy is the only B Corp home energy supplier in the UK, proving their commitment to people and the planet. Rated 5 stars on Trustpilot and Which, you'll also get a great customer experience whether you're installing a heat pump or helping you join a new tariff. And the quality is also guaranteed because Good Energy only installs premium hardware that's built to last and that's backed by long-term warranties. And there are no third parties, just directly employed, highly qualified and accredited teams that treat your home with respect. If you'd like to find out more, head over to goodenergy.co.uk. Lee, let's talk about what really influences the running costs of an air source heat pump. What would you say are the biggest factors that directly impact the running costs?
So I guess there's quite a few factors, but I would say kind of the major factors really are heat load and also efficiency of the system. So once we've designed that system and we know what the loads are, designing the emitters and the system to be able to kind of deliver that heat into the building as efficiently as possible.
This is something that we constantly hear with regards to heat pumps. It's always about efficiency. What exactly makes a system efficient or inefficient? Max?
when we're talking about efficiency, what we're talking about is how much heat are you getting out of the system for how much energy you're putting in. You basically divide one by the other and it tells you how efficient the system is. Common sense tells us the less energy you put in, the cheaper it's going to be. So when we as an industry are talking about efficiency, it pretty much directly translates to running cost. The less energy you're putting in, the more efficient the system is, the more heat you're getting out, the less you're going to pay for that. For those within the industry, it's fairly interchangeable with running costs. Not always. It's generally how much energy you're getting out for as little as possible going into the system.
And what's your take on this, Graham?
Sadly, I'm the guy who lives inside the machine, so I'm really interested in the heat pumps. Number one thing that is determining efficiency is how hard the compressor, the motor in the machine is working. Everything we do, all we're trying to do is make the motor work less. It's kind of a bit indirect, so the temperature of the radiators and the design of the system and so on. I think Lee hit on this perfectly. Something we in our industry forget about is the most efficient and cheapest system to run is the one that's not on. If you don't use it, it doesn't cost anything.
Yeah, you can't get cheaper than that. That's one of the questions we always ask customers, actually, when we go in and talk to them about heating systems, how do they run the system? Because, sometimes they think heat pumps are going to be a magic wand to fix things. There's no cheaper way to run a house or heat a building as efficiently as a heat pump. But when you're kind of comparing it to somebody who's not heating a house or heating it for a couple of hours a day, you can't, or heating it with wood, for instance, on a wood burner, then, you kind of can't get any cheaper than that.
Do you need help understanding your heat pump? Then pick up a copy of From Zero to Heat Pump Hero, an essential guide offering practical advice and basic instructions for new heat pump owners to maximize system efficiency. Available in print and on Kindle, link in the description. Energy in, heat out, which basically leads to your coefficient of performance for that particular system. And you said that typically does determine the efficiency and running costs of that particular system. Is it a fair point to say that if you are running a system with a high COP, that your system is ultimately efficient.
COP is a fancy way we like to put efficiency. So if you hear a COP and it's just a decimalized number or flat number, you could directly translate that to efficiency. So the higher that COP, the more efficient the system is. And I think Lee and Graham touched on it there. You might have a system running 24 hours a day at a COP of say 5. You could have a system that's running a really low efficiency, a low COP, maybe 280% kind of the minimum required by bus. If that's only running for an hour a day at that COP, it's going to cost you less than the really high efficiency system running at 5. The difference being your comfort levels in your property are going to be completely different across the two scenarios. Higher efficiency running longer periods. Heat pumps love it for the barbecue enthusiasts, low and slow. Boilers, they tend to get thrashed for a few hours a day and then turned off again. They don't necessarily directly translate running cost and COP, but the higher the efficiency, the higher your comfort. Generally speaking, the lower your running costs are going to be compared to a like-for-like use of a different appliance.
So I've actually written an article that's basically called the SCOP arms race. And is it now a matter of installers just trying to push the limits to try and get the highest possible SCOP out of systems to, come across their customers and say, look at this efficiency that I've delivered you. I've given you a system that's running at a SCOP of 5. Is that house always going to necessarily be warm? I suppose you can tweak and manipulate aspects of that SCOP. So you drop the flow temperature inside the house. Is that a potential problem in the industry, Lee?
Or some of the platforms that people are looking at to see efficiency, I think that's really good for the industry in terms of really being able to show what a heat pump can deliver. It's great, really, and once people can see that. But as you say, it doesn't always directly translate to somebody having a very warm house or, exactly what they want inside the building. It's a great thing to kind of be able to see that. But as you say, some things are manipulated. It's actually not that difficult to get a well-designed system running on a good COP. But once you start to bring in hot water and things like that, then it kind of tips it over the edge a little bit and starts to bring those further down. And again, it's all about usage in a property. Some people like to use a lot of hot water. I know in my house, the children use a lot of hot water and stuff like that, really. So, it really brings that efficiency down. But if you're just looking at the heating as a whole, it's generally pretty good.
And where do you sit on the SCOP metric, Graham?
I hate it. COP is basically miles per gallon, right? That is all it is. So, if you think about it, no one buys a car on miles per gallon. I have a few vehicles kicking around in my garage. One particular motorbike I have does about 12 miles to the gallon, but I never ride it. So its run cost is £1 a year. The one I drive normally does 40 miles to the gallon, and it costs me more because I do more miles. I just think it's a really perverse way of measuring a system. I'm actually only interested in one thing. I like the unit which is called the pounds per year. So how much does my unit cost? That's it. My wife says I want this place at 23 degrees C, which is why I'm sitting here in my pants, because it's so hot. She doesn't care about the efficiency, but she wants it to be £100 a month. We in the industry are a little bit obsessed by COP and SCOP, but the general public, what do they really want to know is, if you buy a heat pump that costs £100 a month, your boiler costs 90, or your boiler costs 120, we're going to save you something. So we get a little bit obsessed by miles per gallon. And let's be honest, when did you last look at your miles per gallon in your car? You just fill it up and drive it?
I do. Lee, you actually mentioned the hot water. So are there any good strategies for hot water production? If you are running low and slow on your heating, let's say 35 degrees, obviously you want to get your water 45 degrees plus. What are the kind of strategies homeowners can look at in order to try and make their hot water as efficient as possible?
Yeah, I guess it's a similar principle, really. I mean, so as Graham says, the less you can make the compressor work, so that the lower the temperature you can kind of get it to run at, the more efficient it will be. In terms of heating hot water, I guess a lot of people have a misconception of wanting hot water really hot. So, more 50s, potentially a little bit lower if you can. And just getting people to understand that and how they use hot water. And then it's all about kind of the settings to be able to deliver that for the machine. Flow temperature not going up too high, kind of higher than what the actual set point of the hot water is. So there's a little bit of control built into that, really. More settings with inside the machine that could potentially restrict the compressor. So again, it's got a bit of a long run time to be able to kind of heat that hot water.
We heat our hot water to 44 degrees. It's just the temperature that we're quite comfortable with. And our heat pump settings are basically done that the water kind of reheats itself once it hits a certain point. And what we did is we set our differential on the hot water to 15 degrees. So basically when it dropped from 44 to 15 degrees below that, so, if we only used, 5 degrees out of that tank, it wouldn't reheat itself. That gives the compressor probably a longer runtime to reheat, that 15 degree differential. Max, do you think that that's a sensible strategy?
Yeah, definitely. I think you can have heat pumps which may drop a few degrees if they're not set up properly, and then the hot water's constantly interrupting the heating cycle. It's ramping up to higher temperatures. What I do with my heat pump actually is a little bit different. So I'm on an EV tariff, 5 hours overnight. I actually ramp my hot water up to 55 degrees overnight. Much too hot for use because you always blend it down, but it costs me significantly less. I sacrifice efficiency for running costs because I can make that saving over a 5 hour period. The last couple of hours of that, I'll ramp my hot water up to 55 degrees, and then that lasts me throughout the day. And then I've got a little boost in the evening when the kids get back from school, have a shower and everything, which will heat it back up to 40. The strategy, if you like, that I use there is that I sacrifice that efficiency, which some people really chase, top of the SCOPs, as you hear. Differentials definitely one of the kind of key things that you do there if you're on kind of a flat cost. If you can vary those running costs a little bit with use of tariffs, there's different ways you can approach that problem, all with the same outcome, really.
You're listening to the Renewable Heating Hub Homeowners Q&A, empowering consumers with the knowledge they need to make smarter heating choices. So the other thing that kind of affects hot water and efficiency is the legionella cycle. Graham, what is the most sensible strategy towards running your legionella cycle?
I've had a heat pump for 15 years and I am yet to run a legionella cycle, but that's my choice. Legionella is a very strange one. Obviously, it's got to be taken seriously because people do die. There is no legal requirement to do any legionella cycle on a domestic property. There is in a commercial property, absolutely. It's very, very clearly defined in commercial. But because it's a grey area in domestic, we apply the commercial rules. So people do legionella protection because I'm sure none of the fellas on this call want to go to prison. That's what happens if someone gets legionella. So people protect themselves, but it is your choice. I am willing to take the risk in my house. I don't run a legionella cycle. If you were buying a heat pump off me, absolutely I would set a legionella cycle, and I'm not going to tell you how to turn it off. My legionella cycle, if I lived at Max's house, I'd do my legionella cycle in that cheap rate because it's 3 or 4 or 5 times as expensive to do it at another time of the day. So a lot of people have what they call solar diverters, eddies and so on. So it takes the solar PV off the roof and runs the immersion. So what a lot of those guys are doing is running their legionella off the PV. So you run it at midday when the solar's running really well. So basically your legionella's free. I'm a massive fan of that. Chuck it into the immersion. For the COP chasers, it's amazing because your unit didn't do hot water. So they go, look at me, I got a load of free heat for nothing, and I can claim that as my free energy. COP is a silly way of measuring it. Your direct debit, I think, is the way to do it.
When it comes to the legionella cycle, on a low temperature unit, it's going to be the immersion that drives that. If you've got a high temperature unit, is the heat pump itself doing the legionella cycle, Lee?
That's usually right, yeah. So R290 machines that can go up to high temperatures will generally take care of the legionella cycle if it's a good quality machine. I know that some of them don't. But yeah, so the heat pump will take it up there, so you've got a better efficiency than the one-to-one for direct electricity.
Basically, I watch our consumption on our heat pump, whether it is 7 degrees outside or 15 or 20 degrees outside, and the heat pump kicks in either for hot water, like I said, we're only heating to 44, or if it's running the central heating at a temperature of around 35 degrees, I'm seeing very little drop in energy consumption between what I would perceive to be quite a big difference in ambient temperature from kind of 7 degrees to 15 or 20 degrees. Why is it that my consumption still stays relatively much the same?
I'm going to try and do this without being horribly fridge engineering and techie, because it is. So basically your machine, the compressor inside your machine is a motor and it has a variable speed. So let's say it goes from 0 to 1,000 RPM just to make life easy. The problem is if you run it too slow, it stalls like your car. So there's only so far you can turn it down. down. And what you find is that when you're trying to go for very low output temperatures, the machine just can't go slow enough to give that. So it's a bit like you saying, I want to drive my car around at 1 mile an hour because I'm in traffic. You know you have to keep dipping the clutch and stopping and going and stopping and going. And that's what your machine has to do. It just can't go slow enough. So what happens is that you think you're asking it for 25 degrees and it goes, yeah, he's an idiot. Don't worry about that. We can't do 25 degrees. So we're going to do 35, let's say. These are just numbers, by the way. We're going to do 35, but we're going to go on for half the time, off for half the time. So you actually find that your COP, if you're a COP chaser, can be really, really bad under low load because the unit is cycling on, off all the time. And you're thinking you're doing the right thing. I've done a lot of experimentation of this in my old house, trying to run this very, very low radiator temperature below the minimum the machine can do. And you're looking at it going, my COP is awful. My run cost is also very low, but you go, my COP is awful because the unit's struggling. So at the bottom end, you just don't get the performance. Heat pumps in general, this is a very generalized thing. Heat pumps in general like to run from about a third capacity up to 2/3. That's where you get your sort of really lovely efficiencies. The top bit, the last third, when you're thrashing it, it's expensive. And the very, very low bit, you're also getting problems. That's why oversizing is a problem. If you've got a huge unit, spend its whole life in that tiny bottom end, stalling all the time, you get terrible run costs.
Make your home a powerhouse with bespoke solar panel, battery and heat pump systems from Good Energy. Go to goodenergy.co.uk to start your free quote. Another question from a homeowner. They are asking whether there are any specific maintenance routines that they can undertake to optimize the efficiency and costs of their heat pumps, Lee?
Presuming that the system's okay in general anyway, and they've kind of got good efficiencies and stuff's kind of running as it should be, then yeah, general maintenance would be making sure you've got good airflow around the back of the machine, the evaporator is really clean, because that's where it's going to take its energy from. So, the cleaner that is and the more surface area it's got there to be able to kind of absorb that heat, the better. Then obviously being able to get rid of that cool air. So, you don't want any kind of shrubbery or anything like that kind of growing up around it. So making sure it's got that good airflow, and then in terms of the delivery of the heat into the house, it's making sure, if there's any filters on there, there's nothing that's going to restrict that flow rate in terms of the water, because once it's generated that heat, it needs to be able to deliver it into the house and keep that compressor running at the right kind of RPM.
And things like weather compensation, is that something that all homeowners should be aware of? Because when we put our heat pump in 6 years ago, the installers, they told us that our heat pump wasn't capable of running weather compensation. So they set us on a 45-degree set point temperature, which basically made my wife very happy because she walked up to the radiators and they were very warm. And it took me 2 years to figure out, going through the panel, that hang on, what is this little feature here called weather compensation? We enabled that and it works perfectly fine. I don't think it happens as frequently now in terms of installers maybe setting systems to run at set point temperatures, but is it something worth homeowners actually going to their systems and checking to see whether weather compensation is in fact enabled? Max?
Yeah, I think homeowners should definitely be made aware of weather compensation. I think what you got there, Mars, was the reluctance for a callback because the radiators don't quite feel warm. Yeah, I know when we do handovers with customers, we kind of fully explain the temperature that you feel coming from your radiators will change literally with the weather, and we'll explain that. We don't necessarily give customers the route to go and change that themselves, because that sometimes for the uninformed customer can be a bit of a recipe for a disastrous cold day potentially. But what we have, for example, is the ability for customers to phone us. We can remotely change weather compensation curves. So again, we have this ongoing dialogue with customers about how does that feel? Let's try dipping it a little bit. We send out a yearly report saying, if you adjusted your weather curve in this particular fashion, we could save you X running costs as an estimation. It's very important, I think, that customers are aware of weather compensation, what it is, how it works, how it's going to save them money. I mean, everything should be their choice, right? They can't make an informed choice if they don't know about the weather compensation. They might be happy with longer reheat times for cheaper running costs. Conversely, you might have a particularly vulnerable customer who needs hot radiators and a quick heat up time and is happy with that additional running cost that's going to come with that. So yeah, I think homeowners should be aware. Able to adjust it, I would say that depends on the customer that you have. Say somebody adjusts it on Christmas Eve and there's nobody available to come out for 2 weeks. It's going to be a tricky period if the customer doesn't know what they're doing with that.
Graham, are there any instances where homeowners shouldn't use weather compensation? Are there any systems where they would be favorable of actually just running set points all the time? Or is weather compensation just something that everybody should have?
The only time I've ever looked at a system that would weather comp isn't used is when you're heating a swimming pool. because you want the swimming pool at the same temperature all the time. I like to refer everything to cars, as you've probably worked out. Weather comp is like having a throttle. Yeah, do you drive your car at 60 all the time, even in traffic, or do you massage the speed to match what's required? The nice thing about weather comp is, and I completely agree with everything Max says, you don't need to go to your machine to see if you've got weather comp. This podcast is a great time of year in October. Outside at the moment where I am, it's 16, 17 degrees. Heating's hardly on. Tonight it's going to be cold. So all you need to do, have a feel of the rads during the middle of the day. Are they, they're warmish. Tonight when it's really cold outside, have a feel. Are they noticeably warmer? If they are, you've got weather comp. It's on and things are looking good. If your rads are just hot all the time, then you need to call someone in and get weather comp. Because as we mentioned all the way through this podcast, the harder the machine works, the more money you spend. So by definition, if I can run my rads all day today at 35 and this evening at 45, I'm saving money during the day and I'm spending a bit more when I need it. And that's the key.
So what temperature are you heating your indoor swimming pool to, Graham?
43, my wife. No, I haven't made that much money in heat pumps.
Planning to install an air source heat pump? Then get your copy of Bodge Buster. It's packed with must-ask questions, real homeowner insights, and a practical guide for a smoother installation. Available in print and on Kindle. Link in the description. So Graham, we have another question from a homeowner. Oliver has had a heat pump for 2 years and he's thinking about upgrading his insulation to help lower the running costs of his heat pump. Now, what he's asking is, if he adds too much insulation to his property, will that potentially mean that his heat pump is now oversized?
Let's imagine that Oliver lives in a terribly insulated house and he does an amazing job and reduces his heat loss by 50%. That actually, weirdly, if the house, that's not uncommon. Potentially, if the heat pump he has today is big enough for the house he lives in today, it will be twice as big as it needs to be in his newly insulated property. So the purist would say what he needs to do now is rip out that large heat pump and buy a smaller one. I would suggest he doesn't do that. The heat pump is now too big for the job. And yes, it's not going to be as efficient as it could be if he had the right size unit. But the amount of kilowatts he has to squirt into that house per annum has halved. So even though his efficiency falls a bit, his run cost will drop enormously. The unit will cycle a bit. They do. Definitely don't replace it till it's old and worn out, and then get a new one the right size at that point.
So we actually just did an episode on myths and heat pumps. Are there any misconceptions, Lee, about the running costs of heat pumps?
A badly designed system that's operating not very well will cost a lot of money. There's no doubt about it. There are some bad installations out there that you kind of come across, which is really unfortunate, really. But, you can generally, make modifications, get systems to work better by just doing some quite simple things, really, to make them work much better.
What do you think, Max? Have you come across any misconceptions with regards to running costs?
A few of the red top newspapers do a great job of highlighting the 1 in 100 installs, which are £20,000 a year to run or whatever kind of prices you see on there on somebody's castle who's got it plumbed into a radiator that's outside or something. There are, as Lee said, there are installs that are done badly. It's the same with gas. People just aren't looking at gas under the microscope. You can get terrible installations in pretty much any walk of life. Insulation could be put in wrong. I wouldn't say it's a misconception because they do exist. What I would say is if you go to a very good kind of reputable installer, designer, you're going to get a good system. Buzz, you said, was it 2 years you had no weather compensation on your system before you turned it on? I mean, that's a couple of presses of a button, and overnight your running costs have come down hugely. Yeah. So making sure you've got a reputable installer who kind of knows what they're doing, and you can't go far wrong, really, because they are fantastic machines. They are more efficient than anything else that you can really compare them to. So if they're put in well, you shouldn't have astronomical running costs.
So Graham, why are heat pumps under the microscope the whole time? I mean, nobody cares if a gas boiler has been put in and is inefficient. Why is it that people have so many hang-ups about heat pumps?
It's entirely the fault of us lot, the people selling them. If I said to you, Mars, I'm going to buy a new lawnmower, right? You go, oh, just buy this one. And I'd go along to the shop and I go, I like that one. It's green, and I'd buy it. If you ring me up or Lee up or Max up, sorry, guys, I'm just filling in for you here. So tell me if I'm doing this wrong. We're defensive, right? So you go, I want to buy a heat pump. And immediately we're on the back foot going, no, they are good, honest, they do work. And we're saying this at the beginning. When you buy a boiler, you go, I want a boiler. They go, oh, okay, I want a boiler. What colour do you want, white or black? Black, okay. In it goes. No one talks to you about the insides of the unit and the refrigerant and all that stuff. And we pile in there and start telling the customer about COP and the refrigerant global warming. And you're thinking, what are you doing, man? Just go, what is it? It's a boiler. It's a green boiler. It doesn't kill polar bears. It lives outside. One of the things, again, I agree with what Max said. If you're looking to buy a heat pump, ask your installer how much it's going to cost per year, right? Let's say the guy says £100 a month average. Obviously, it doesn't cost the same every month. It costs less in summer, more in winter. If your installer won't give you that information, then you start thinking, bloody hell, this could cost a fortune. But if I've told you, look, Mars, in January, this thing's going to cost you 250 quid, and in August, it's going to cost you 20, and you've got a little plot out, you can look at it after a month and go, I'm on track. This is good. No problem. You don't need to then explain COP and so on. So just get a forecast of the run cost out. And then they'll be ringing people like Lee and Max and myself up going, you said it'd be 25 quid this month. It's 30. You go, okay, it's a little high. We'll have a look at it. But don't just leave them in the kind of good luck, turn it on. And that's what a lot of people do. But I think, that microscopic look into it is caused by us. We genuinely think that Mrs. Miggins thinks heat pumps are interesting. I can assure you, if I was to ask Mrs. Hendra in at the moment, she doesn't care. She just knows it's warm.
Does it not have something to do with the fact that heat pumps are actually quite geeky? Like, there's so much to tweak and monitor and do where boilers just don't have that ability to do stuff. Do you think that kind of buys into why they're under the microscope? Because you can just extract so much information from them.
The big difference between a boiler and a heat pump is that in a heat pump, we measure the energy. So I can go to my heat pump right now, any heat pump under the market, and in some way ask it, what are you consuming or what have you consumed? They don't do that in boilers as a rule because they don't measure it. So the genius of the boiler is that all boilers are 85% efficient because that's what it says in the marketing. If I took the measurement device out my heat pump, I could go, hey, COP of 6. And you go, amazing. But some idiot came up with the idea of giving people the data. So, if you bought a car from the 1970s, it doesn't tell you the miles per gallon, but a new car does. If you don't measure it, it's not a problem. And I always use this lovely phrase, which is be careful what you measure.
As a complete ballpark, Lee, how many of your customers demand getting access to either the back end or to some sort of app where they can actually monitor things?
Not very many, really. I would say it's a small percentage. I mean, they all want to have the connectivity where they have it on their phone and they can kind of see remotely, I think the great thing about that as well is, it'll email customers as well, just to notify them that if there's an issue, which is a great thing, really. Generally, what you'll find is they'll get it on the phone and they'll play around it for a week or two, and then they totally forget about it, kind of thing. So they all want that. But they don't really kind of want to see the back end of stuff unless they're really geeky kind of thing, and then they'll look into it in a bit more detail.
And what about you, Max? What kind of percentage are you looking at with your customers?
Not so much now. Most customers now are just happy to have a working system and that we'll drop them a message if anything's wrong with it. But I'd say probably a year, maybe even 2 years ago, it seems like everybody wanted to know what was going on. But I think we were installing at that time for physicists who were doing research papers for their particular establishments and things like that. So I think it used to be a much higher level of people wanting to know down to the nuts and bolts what's going on, but that seems to be tailing off at the moment.
Funny what you said about people sort of wanting the app and then they sort of forget about it. That is exactly my journey. When I got my unit in, I'm monitoring everything and what's going on day by day and looking at all the graphs. So I have 2 heat pumps, and one of them you can do absolutely everything on, and one of them is more homeownery. A few days ago, I thought I'll just check up on my system, just see if it's all right. It turns out my app didn't work anymore. I've been logged out for months, and you just didn't notice. And also, it isn't a cool enough technology. I mean, I'm going out with a few friends tonight. I won't be whipping the phone out and showing them the app going, hey, look at the temperature in my lounge. Yeah, it's not cool enough. But when you first get it, it is quite an interesting thing. I think about this a lot. If you think about what we're doing as a job, we go to a customer and say, if you give me 15,000 quid, I'm going to put a weird boiler in your house, right? Can you imagine the discussion with my mates at the pub tonight when I go, just run 15 grand on a heating system? They go, are you mental? And My installer, I know I am the installer, but I think my installer's job is to give me the stuff to tell my friends at the bar why I've done it. Can you imagine? You're all stood around there going, that dickhead's just spent 15 grand on a heating system and he doesn't even know why. It's really weird. And can you imagine? I'm going, well, the COP of the system I'm putting in is, and the global warming potential. And the guys are going, yeah, he's a loser. But if I go, I'm doing it for the kids and that, I just think we need slightly more sexier messaging. When you buy a car, and we've all done it, you're speaking to your mates and you go, I've got this car, it's got electric heated seats and it's got this and that. So the car people are really good at giving you reasons for saying why you've blown all the money. And we're talking about global warming potential.
You're listening to the Renewable Heating Hub Homeowners Q&A, empowering consumers with the knowledge they need to make smarter heating choices. So that's a wrap on today's discussion on heat pump running costs. A big thank you to today's guests, Lee, Graham and Max. We hope this episode has helped demystify the costs associated with running costs and given you some practical advice on how you can manage your costs effectively. And a big thank you once again to today's sponsor, Good Energy. From solar panels and batteries to heat pumps and solar energy tariffs, Good Energy takes care of everything you need to make your home a powerhouse. Their blog is also full of information for green tech enthusiasts with expert articles, videos, and case studies explaining how to get the best value from your upgrades. Head over to getenergy.co.uk to find out more. As always, if you have any more questions or need further advice, be sure to check out the Renewable Heating Hub website, follow us on social media, and don't forget to subscribe. Stay warm, stay green, stay tuned.